You need me to call him up here? It looks okay. Yeah. It looks okay. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm delighted to host Dr. Cornel West and Mr. Tavis Smiley today. Dr. West is a class of 1943 university professor at Princeton University. He's best known for his classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters. From film to TV to radio to spoken word and, of course, authorship, Dr. West crosses all media and to communicate his message. Time magazine describes him as one complex dude, a brilliant scholar, political activist, and committed Christian, and a soul brother to the bone. Welcome, Dr. West.
Blessed to be here. Thank you so very much. Blessed to be here. Very much so.
Mr. Smiley is president and CEO of the Smiley Group. He co-hosts the late-night talk show, Tavis Smiley, and also has his own radio show on Public Radio International, the Tavis Smiley Show. He, too, is a multimedia communicator covering race, religion, politics, social justice, and all of those topics in ways that challenge our beliefs. He's not only a voice for change, but he is an inspiration for our youth. Because of the Tavis Smiley Foundation, more than 6,000 youth have been trained in leadership. These two co-host a show together on Public Radio International, called Smiley and West. They both collectively have written 35 books. Both have had New York Times bestsellers, and they finally come together to raise awareness about a topic which they coined the P word, or poverty in America. Please join me in welcoming Tavis Smiley and Cornel West to talk about the rich and the rest of us. We have a video that we want to show. Do you want to?
Yeah. I think this piece is called I Had Everything, and the short answer is that last summer, Dr. West and I took a poverty tour. We got on a bus and went to 11 states and 18 cities across the country, trying to get a sense of what poverty had really done to America. What was the impact of the so-called Great Recession on everyday people in this country? Doc and I believe that poverty is the moral, and the spiritual issue of our time. But it required us to do a little bit more research, so we wanted to get out on the road, give up a part of our summer to try to see what the new face of poverty looked like. So for so long in this country, poverty has been color-coded. So you think poverty, you think black. You think poverty, you think brown. But with the Census Bureau letting us know that 1 out of every 2 Americans is either in or near poverty, 50% of our nation, 150 million people, are either in or near poverty. Clearly the face of poverty had changed, and we wanted to see what the new face of poverty looked like to have a better understanding of how we ought to advance our work, Stacey, about what poverty is, what it is not, how to reduce it, how to eradicate it. So we got on this bus, again, 11 states, 18 cities, had a documentary crew in tow with me, and we turned that tour into a week-long special on PBS. So for 5 nights on national television on PBS, there were these short pieces, these 7 to 10 minute pieces on each night about what we saw about a particular theme, particular subject matter, particular aspect or angle of poverty. And that these short mini docs, if you will, these mini docs were then followed by extensive conversations with experts about these particular issues. So this is a piece that aired on one of the 5 nights of the PBS special, born of our poverty tour last summer, the precursor for the book we're going to talk about today. It's about 7 or 8 minutes. It's called I Had Everything, and I think to give you a good sense of what we experienced on the tour. So take a look.
Roll the video.
The largest economic institutions were brought to their collective knees at government's doorstep in search of salvation, the bailout. Wall Street socialized its failure on the back of Main Street. The resulting housing crisis and jobs crisis fostered a poverty unseen in generations, a poverty not just of inner city ghettos and barrios, but of the suburbs, crossing all racial lines. Nearly 1/3 of the middle class, mostly families with children, have fallen now into poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Cornel West.
All right. Oh, what a blessing to be at the heart of the blues land. I've always considered myself a blues man in the life of the mind, because the blues ain't nothing but an autobiographical chronicle of a personal catastrophe expressed lyrically. The blues is universal. We don't care what color, what culture, what civilization. Everybody has some catastrophe, but the question is, what is your response to the catastrophic? Will it be love and justice, or will it be hatred or revenge? And the blues said it's all about the love.
Well, this is the homeless vet corner. That's what we are. We're the homeless vets at Freedom House. He talked about the poverty. That's what, you know, I had a job, I had a family, I had, you know, everything a person's supposed to have. The car, the whole bit. And I'm down to nothing right now. You know, I've been like in retail for almost 30 years. I was working for one of the major stores who decided last year they needed to close 140 of their stores down. All of a sudden, everything was thrown out from under us. I worked with people that had been with the company 30, 40 years. A year or two left to be able to get kind of, you know, whatever pensions or, you know, the things that they had worked hard to be able to have in their retirement. People that only had like a year or so to go lost all of that. Because I didn't have the job, I also lost my home. And because of losing my home, I had, you know, my wife and I had to make sure she was cared for, because I couldn't, you know, there wasn't any way. And so we split up, and we've been separated for about 9 months now.
There's so much love in his heart. The king might be lapsed sometimes, not singing about Christ, but you can feel the love when he plays Lucille, because he knows that he's wrestling with misery, but misery never, ever has the last word, even if all he could do is stroke his guitar and sing his song.
Many Americans of all races, colors, and creeds are finding themselves in poverty. More children of all races, colors, and creeds from 2008 to 2009 joined the ranks of the poor in this country than at any other point in time in recorded data in the history of this country. A country for me is not a great nation unless it takes care of its babies.
The unemployment rate in Detroit is 31%. That's a depression, that's not a recession.
Right.
I just want to speak to the fact that I feel like I did everything that I was supposed to do over time. I educated myself, educated my children, home ownership, and I'm not unique.
I'm a person that has been laid off with my job. I've had my car repossessed and my home is up for sale. My boss explained to me that he could hire 2 20-somethings for my salary, and I can bring a lot to the situation where people are looking for experience that I've had over these last 30 years, but to just kind of put me out to pasture when I'm not ready is devastating.
Because when she says that she is the face of poverty, she is. I've been saying, and Dr. West has been saying consistently on this tour, that the new poor in this country are the former middle class.
There is poverty on so many different levels, poverty like we've never seen before. And there's such a, there's so much greed at the top and so much corporate greed that something has to be done.
There are more poor white people catching hell than there are black people. We are in a class war right now. If you think there's one coming, it's already here. They just didn't declare it.
There was a white woman who was standing on the sidewalk who was waiting for our bus to pull up so she could read Dr. West and me the riot act.
I run the Tennessee Williams Festival. Y'all are upsetting me. You have chosen Columbus, Mississippi. This is not a poverty town.
She didn't like the idea that we would bring a poverty tour and pull up outside this big poverty tour bus. You're stigmatizing our town.
I'm an ex-military man. Both lost our jobs. I said, very well. Got to pawn cars, got to do everything just to keep our home. Strong, healthy, can do it all. Got all kind of skills. Nobody's just not hiring.
Your husband and wife both lost your jobs in the same month?
Same month. February 2011. And trying to keep the house and both our cars is pawned.
I'm not a talker because I'm going to start crying because I get emotional.
Don't do that.
Like early said, he been cutting grass. I go clean house. I have worked with all type of patients. I got my CDL license. I can do just about anything. I'm willing to do it. They cut us off the stamp, penalize us. We make $2 too much. We find foreclosure just like she said. Life insurance for 30 years gone. Car insurance gone. It turned the cable off last week. The gas gone out the house. No one know how you live, but like you said, have faith, pray, and we have each other. We have God, and we just keep on going.
See, Prairie used to just serve the elderly and the disabled. Now we serving everybody that need to serve. This year we had a budget of $2 million. 2012, our budget is going to be about $800,000. So that's limited, all the service that.
From $2 million to $800,000. It's not even half, so less than half.
Those are the cut that came from the federal. So you can see now we're going to have very limited service in 2012. And when we're dealing with a big issue of poverty. So that's just going to make things worse. It just seems like to me that the government has forgotten about the people. And we need to put that emphasis back on the people.
Columbus, Mississippi, the birthplace, of course, of the greatest lyrical playwright in the history of the country. His major theme is those who escape from reality. The engagement with reality, the engagement with history, and the engagement with memory requires an engagement with poverty. And so the blues coming out of Mississippi is an engagement with history, an engagement with memory. It's engagement with poverty and a resilience against it. Endurance, fight back. And this is a love tour that fights back.
Wow. What a story. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, so as I was watching this video, some of the comments definitely hit home for me, and it's probably not a secret that there's people in this room who this hits home for. So we're delighted to have you come and talk about what you experienced and why this is important for you. A lot of the themes that came out in this video and in your book talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how a collective we are not living out that dream. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Please. First, I just want to thank you. I want to thank Google for allowing Brother Tavis and I to be here. And anytime I get a chance to spend time with this high-quality freedom fighter I've known for 25 years, consider him my younger brother, and I'm his older brother.
All right.
So anytime we get a chance to spend time together, it's a beautiful thing. And I want to acknowledge, too, the magnificent work that Google does. We had met a group here at Google and had a wonderful conversation. They were telling me magnificent things taking place here. And my dear daughter, Zaytune, who is a computer wizard, who's teaching me both about Google and about other aspects of the computer.
Good.
I want to acknowledge.
Very good.
Oh, yes. But let's start with Brother Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer, that rich tradition that Tavis Smiley and I have dedicated our lives to, which is all about a quest for unarmed truth. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. So we're concerned about the suffering of all people of all colors, all sexual orientations, all religions and non-religions, but human beings who really ought to be living lives much more of higher quality and dignity. And also the unapologetic love. We're quite explicit about talking about love. That's why this really has been a love tour. And for us, Brother Martin used to say, justice is what love looks like in public. So when you really love people, and we have a deep love for poor people, you can't stand the fact that they're being treated unjustly and unfairly. And when you look at the relation between poverty on the one hand and the maldistribution of wealth, the wealth inequality that the Occupy movement rightly talks about, we say we've got to bring a limelight to it. Tavis's idea to have this poverty tour, my only condition was we begin on the Indian reservation with our precious indigenous brothers and sisters.
Excellent.
And we started there on the Indian reservations. You can look at America through a very different set of lens. You look at it from 1492, World War I, been going on ever since. 311 reservations now, 50% unemployment, levels of social breakdown and so forth. Then we moved to the brown barrios with our Latino brothers and sisters, dealing with immigration policy. Then we went to the black ghetto, or we used to, you know, we on the chocolate side of town, to where we come from. But then also our white brothers and sisters and our Asian brothers and sisters. So to make it a holistic thing to keep alive the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer.
You spend a good amount of time in the book taking us back and going back and looking at history. and talking about how this is not a recent issue. Why was it important to do that?
Well, one, because we have to understand America itself, of course, was born in revolutions, revolution against monarchy. But of course, we still had mistreatment of indigenous peoples and slavery. So the U.S. Constitution, pro-slavery document in practice for almost 80 years. Wonderful words on paper, on the ground, slavery at work. Then we broke the back of slavery. Magnificent, democracy alive, expanding, deepening. But here comes Jim Crow, slavery by another name. And that's what the Civil Rights Movement was all about. But now our present wrestling is with oligarchy. We got 1% of the population on 42% of the wealth. The top 400 individuals have wealth equivalent to the bottom 150 million fellow citizens. That level of wealth inequality cannot sustain a fragile experiment in democracy.
People in this room love data, so I think they probably like the last part of what you just said. Tavis, the subtitle of this book is called a manifesto. Are you concerned, are you worried about critics thinking that you're pushing a liberal agenda, and is that going to get in the way of achieving what you want to achieve by writing this book?
Yeah, it's a good question, Stacey. I don't think this is about liberal versus conservative. It's not even about black versus white. It's about wrong versus right. And the question is, are we committed to the best in and for every American? I think that whether we're black or white, Republican, Democrat, liberal or conservative, educated or illiterate, urban or suburban, we all want the same thing as Americans, and that's simply to live in a nation that is as good as its promise. That's all we want. Nobody's asking for more. Nobody ought to settle for less. But we all ought to have the opportunity to live in a nation that is as good as its promise. The problem with America, as currently structured, is that the gap between the possibility of America and the promise available to every American, that gap is too wide. So the gap between the promise and the possibility is too wide, and it's ever expanding. As I mentioned earlier, when you have now 50% of your people living in or near poverty, as Doc suggested a moment ago, that's a catastrophe waiting to happen. And we argue very aggressively and unapologetically in the text that poverty threatens our democracy. So if you are a liberal, if you are a conservative, if you're on the left, if you're on the right, and you love America, and you care about preserving and protecting our democracy, then poverty is going to have to be addressed. My read of history suggests, and I haven't studied this as much as Professor West has, of course he teaches this stuff, but my read of history suggests to me that there is no empire in the history of the world that at some point did not falter or fail. Every empire at some point falters or fails. And I don't know if it's our hubris or our arrogance, our narcissism, our patriotism, which has now run amok and become nationalism. I don't know what it is, but for some reason we don't even want to wrestle with the fact that this democracy could be on the precipice of something very, very dangerous. And what we argue in this book again is that poverty is the moral, the spiritual issue of our time. If you don't want to put it in moral terms, in spiritual terms, if you want to take it out of the body politic, the fundamental point is that democracy as we know it is unsustainable if we let this divide continue to grow.
And highlight for us, you talk about poverty. A lot of times people think of the homeless person on the street who's done something bad or is ill, but you reframe it to talk about this new poor or near poor.
And that's what this video we saw is all about, trying to let people see what the new face of poverty is. We were just in New York a couple of weeks ago. I, for the first time in my career, moderated for PBS and for C-SPAN a panel of all women. It was an all-woman panel of experts talking about the issue of poverty vis-a-vis women and children. Something is wrong with a nation that allows its women and children to fall faster into poverty than any other segment of the population. That's where we are right now. Women and their babies are falling into poverty faster than any other group of Americans. And so that it's important for us to see the faces of these Americans, of all races, of all colors, of all creeds. I won't repeat what Dr. West said earlier, but he gave you a good sense. In the back of the book, we've laid out the poverty tour that we took. So there's a wonderful appendix in the back of the text that lays out. And when Doc and I, first thought about it, we weren't sure we were going to put that in the book. But the more we wrestled with it, and our wonderful editor, Cheryl Woodruff, decided that we should, in fact, put this in the book. Because she said people need to know where you went and who you saw and what you experienced. There were some wonderful narratives, woven through the book, but we wanted people to just be able to look at a snapshot of what the tour was all about. So in the piece you just saw a moment ago, that white brother you saw in that piece, he's not just white, he's a military veteran. That whole room, as you saw, was a room full of military veterans. Something is wrong with a nation that allows military vets to put their lives on the line for our freedoms, and they come home and they can't find gainful employment. There's something wrong with that. And so the fact that he and his wife had to split, there's nothing wrong with their relationship. They just couldn't make it together. So they had to separate so that both of them could try to survive. And very quickly, what you saw him basically saying, what I took from what he said that night, and Doc and I saw this repeatedly throughout the tour, is that there's so many people now wrestling with poverty, and it's so egregious and it's so widespread across the country that people are no longer concerned about their homes. They've lost their homes. They've been unemployed for 2 or 3 years, some of them. They've lost their 401k. They've lost all their savings. They're beyond the embarrassment in front of family and friends that they've been unemployed for so long. But you know what they're trying to hold on to? Their dignity, Stacey. They're fighting to hold on to their dignity because, as everyone at Google here understands, there is dignity in work. There is dignity in our labor. And when you don't have an opportunity to work, to use your God-given skills, then your dignity is threatened. And then you start to wrestle with your own humanity. And when half of the country is wrestling with that, now you see why we say that this is threatening to our very democracy. Now you see why Dr. West says all the time, and we lay out in the text, that this is a matter of national security when you start having half your population wrestle with these kinds of issues.
You've both been pretty outspoken that the current administration, and even as we go through the Republican primaries, have either ignored using the P word, saying poverty, or used it in ways that aren't uplifting in your mind, and that there's a responsibility that's lacking. Why do you feel so strongly about that, and what exactly is lacking in your mind?
You said something about Obama?
A little bit.
You know what I mean?
No, I have great love for my dear brother, President. But Brother Tavis and I believe in protecting him against vicious right-wing lies and respecting him as a human being and president and correcting him because we love poor people. We love working people. And that's true for any president, any color. Must be accountable in that sense. But I think part of it has to do with the fact that Brother Tavis and I come out of a tradition that says that there's a difference between success and greatness. So success is a beautiful thing. Material prosperity can be magnificent if you know how to use it. Don't allow it to devour your soul. Having status and title and wealth can be fine too. But if one is well adjusted to injustice, then you could be successful and not great. See, greatness has to do with what is the quality of how you treat other people. What's the quality of your service to others? I'm a Christian, so it's the least of these, right? Our Jewish brothers and sisters gave a great gift to the world, prophetic voices of Amos and so forth. What you do to the least of these is the measure of your greatness. So don't tell me how much money you got. Don't tell me how big your crib is. I want to know what the quality of the love and service you have, especially those catching hell, the weak and vulnerable. But that's the legacy of Martin as well, but we've been shaped by that. So when I look at any president, I want to know, well, what is the quality of your service to the least of these? Now we look at the administration and we see, well, often people say, well, poor people are individuals who have bad flaws and make bad judgments. I say, that sounds like some investment bankers I know. Flaws, bad judgments. What do they get? Bailouts. Individuals, flaws, bad judgment, pull yourself up by your own bootstrap, deal with the consequences of your failure. This is a country that awards success, but if you're not successful and you go under, you have to take responsibility. Okay, if that's true, then let's play the game by one set of rules. You can see the hypocrisy set in. So when I looked at the Obama administration, I saw Tim Geithner and Larry Summers and others, I said, my God, they don't have a history of being highly sensitive to the suffering of poor and working people. They're Wall Street extensions. Either worked on Wall Street or very intimate relations with Wall Street. Wall Street got that friendly treatment, you see. And we make this point. in the book. Well, where's investigations of Wall Street, insider trading, market manipulation? We know Jamal and Letitia get caught with a crack bag on the corner, they're going to jail. Was there criminal activity on Wall Street? My hunch is, let's have the investigation. Let's see whether they violated the law and so forth. So I see the Obama administration early on too cozy with Wall Street, and that was made the point in terms of Main Street. Now, when he does wonderful things, we applaud it. Health care extended for children, magnificent. What was the Lily
Ledbetter.
For the Sisters of All Colors?
First law he signed. Great decision.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
But when he's turning his back to poor and working people, we hit him lovingly. Not just him, but the whole administration, you know. So.
And that's fair.
Absolutely. Because we have a system where oligarchs really rule with both parties in place. Republicans, deeply conservative, but oligarchic rule. Democrats, neoliberal, but oligarchic rule. Both tied to big money. Who speaks for poor people on K Street? 13,000 lobbyists. Marion Wright Edelman. That's about it. Some churches, some mosques, some synagogues that are prophetic. We're not talking about the Constantinian ones who are well adjusted to the oligarchic rule, you see.
And context here is very important. Most people miss this. 4 years ago, when we were in the last campaign for the White House with Mr. Obama, Mr. McCain, 3 presidential debates. The word poor or poverty does not come up one time in 3 presidential debates.
That's right.
We all recall the economy was tanking at that point. We were headed into the so-called Great Recession at that moment. The word poor poverty doesn't come up one time in 3 presidential debates. Obama doesn't utter it. McCain doesn't utter it. The moderators in those 3 debates don't even ask about it. Fast forward 4 years, and nobody, except Wall Street bankers, are better off now than they were 4 years ago. Poverty abounds. 50% of us are wrestling with it. You have the perennially poor. You have the new poor. As I said earlier, the new poor are the former middle class. And you have the near poor, folk who are just a paycheck away. That's, again, 150 million of us, half of us wrestling with poverty. So we can't have another campaign for the White House, Stacey, where the issue of poverty doesn't get addressed. When you raise this issue with Mr. Romney, he wants to suggest that we're playing the politics of envy. That's nonsense. Nobody poor is jealous or envious of wealthy people. People just want an opportunity. They want a chance to work. They want their dignity. They want to revel in their own humanity and that of their loved ones and family. So it's not a politics of envy. But we can't have another campaign where this issue doesn't get addressed. We are out here now unapologetically with humility to put this issue on the agenda. And we're not the only ones. But to raise this issue higher up on the American agenda so this time around we don't go through another campaign where this issue doesn't get addressed. Thankfully, Occupy is back. It's the spring, and they're going to be in full force. So I think this time we're going to see a different conversation than we saw 4 years ago. But we can't, our democracy, again, cannot survive us putting our head in the sand and ignoring this issue, particularly in a presidential election year. So Doc is right. It's not just the Democrats, Republicans. Nobody wants to make this an issue. We say in the book that there seems to be in Washington right now a bipartisan consensus that the poor just don't matter. A bipartisan consensus that poverty is just not an important enough issue to address, and that's what so troubles us.
So you talk about some past presidents, Johnson, Truman, Roosevelt, as people who came in with their administration and did something about poverty. What impressed you about what they did? What can the current administration or a future administration learn from that?
Well, Tavis always makes the point that each administration has to be pushed, and he's right about that. LBJ was pushed by the social movements of the 1960s, both the civil rights movement, the trade union movement, also religious people who were concerned about the plight of poor people. And so it went from 22% to 11% in terms of the poverty rate within 10 years. With LBJ's program, especially impact on the elderly, major investment, and that's what we're calling for. We need to shift from this discourse about austerity and cuts and need to talk about investment, infrastructure, research and development for technological innovation, but especially for jobs with a living wage, job training centers, and we really know what to do. Paul Krugman makes this point in his recent book, in this depression now. We know what to do. We just don't have the will to do it because, again, the political system is broken down. It's become an instance of legalized bribery and normalized corruption. And it's hard to get the voices of poor and working people heard given that hemorrhage that's taken place. And in the meantime, our bridges are collapsing, educational systems collapsing for working and poor children, and more this wealth inequality is escalating.
If I can add to that very quickly, Stacey, sure. In the back of the book, the last chapter of the book is called The Poverty Manifesto. The book starts with a portrait of poverty. It's important for us to understand how we arrived at this place. We start with a portrait of poverty, and then the next chapter it talks about the poverty of opportunity in this country. And then we talk about the poverty of affirmation, and the poverty of vision, and the poverty of courage, and the poverty of imagination. And we walk through these various chapters under these kinds of themes, weaving this narrative, what we think ought to be done, and how we address this issue, and what hasn't been done, quite frankly. At the end of the book, there is the appendix about the tour that we took. But beyond that, the final part is this poverty manifesto, where, to your question more expressly, we lay out a dozen things that we think need to be done to get serious about reducing and eradicating poverty in this country. So there are 12 specific ideas at the end of the text that we think that we ought to, as a nation, take seriously. One of those ideas is the calling of a White House conference on the eradication of poverty. I mentioned earlier the power the president has with a pen. The first thing that President Obama did, the minute he got inaugurated on those steps, and we all watched and cried and celebrated, he walked inside.
I'm not sure all of us did, but a significant number of fellow citizens did. We did, but we got a lot of people brothers and sisters hard to adjust to that.
I take that. Yeah. Some folks do have a hard time 4 years later.
Right. We pray for them. They just got challenged.
I take that loving correct.
They got challenged. That's right.
But he walked inside and signed Lilly Ledbetter, which is, again, what should have been done a long time ago with respect to women in the workplace. Yeah. What we are suggesting, and what we're not suggesting, calling for in this text on this list of 12 things, is that the next president, as his first official act, Mr. Romney, Mr. Obama, or somebody else that we don't know of at this moment, they ought to, after inauguration, through presidential order, through executive order, establish a White House conference on the eradication of poverty. Bring in all the poverty experts into the White House for 2 or 3 days, and let's develop a national plan. Not a Band-Aid, not a quick fix, but a national plan. This ain't rocket science. As Doc said, it's not a skill problem, it's a will problem. But bring the experts together. You know, there are all kinds of plans right now that exist for how to eradicate, how to reduce poverty in this country over 10, 15, 25 years. Catholic Charities has one, Jim Wallace at Sojourners, Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia. These programs, these plans exist for how to reduce poverty significantly in this country. There are other countries that have done this. We just have not had the kind of leadership since President Johnson, that you raised, Stacey, had that kind of presidential leadership, and that covers Republicans and Democrats, so we're not trying to cast aspersion or demonize Mr. Obama, but we need that kind of leadership from the top down, that kind of bully pulpit that the White House offers the president to make poverty a priority in this country. And finally, again, echoing what Dr. West said, that great presidents aren't born, great presidents are made. They have to be pushed into their greatness. So there is no Abraham Lincoln without Frederick Douglass pushing him. There is no FDR without A. Philip Randolph pushing him. There is no LBJ without MLK pushing him. So those of us who care about the future of this democracy and who understand that poverty, again, threatens that very democracy, cannot be afraid. We got to find the courage, the conviction, and the commitment to push all of our leaders to make poverty a priority.
So who is the push going to come from for us today?
Like people sitting in this room.
And watching on YouTube.
And watching on YouTube, absolutely. People of good conscience, with courage, who want to make the world a better place, who are deeply concerned about injustice, deeply concerned about unnecessary social misery. And we are witnessing that. There is a democratic awakening that's taking place, not just in America, Tunisia, Egypt, Spain, Greece, and so forth. Your example of Chile, right, to go from 40% poverty to 11.5% poverty. That's major. That's major. Wealth inequality is still a challenge, but that's major. We can learn something. And it's a situation which we in the United States often viewing ourselves as out ahead of other people. That's part of our American exceptionalism. You know, God winks at us and closes God's eyes to other nations. You know, we know that's a lie, but we oftentimes like to believe that. we free and democratic because we fight to keep it free and democratic. We can lose it. And the younger generation can lose it if you don't fight, you see. But it's going to come from everyday people. It's going to come from ordinary citizens who wake up and say, look, our priorities are war. We came up with $500 billion, a Marshall Plan for jails and prisons in the last 25 years. But we say when it comes to education, we don't have the money, got to cut. Jobs, don't have the money. Housing, don't have the money. Comes to war, Iraq, Afghanistan, trillions of dollars we either found or went in debt. The priority. And Brother Tavis is right. He says, but poverty is a matter of national security, state of emergency. When it becomes a priority, we follow through. We execute.
So I know people in the audience have questions. If you can queue up at the mic as I ask one more question. Priorities. In your plan, your 12-point plan, you actually talk about women and children as being a priority.
Absolutely.
Tell me more about that.
Women and children first. I think probably one of the saddest features of the United States today is that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be poor. In the richest nation of the history of the world, 23% of our precious children of all color live in poverty. 40% of red. Never forget our indigenous brothers and sisters. 39% brown children live in poverty. 38% of black children live in poverty. That, to me, is just a moral abomination. It's an ethical obscenity that could be the case. You know what I mean? Finland got 3% of their children. It's no accident they're number one in education. You see? They have a commitment to education. Teachers, a whole culture of equity and shared responsibility. And their teachers, the major graduates of universities, become teachers rather than investment bankers. But of course, they only got 5.5 million, so they don't have to rule the world the way the United States office views itself as, and that no military commitment and so forth, you see. But a different kind of culture. And we can learn something from Finland without imitating them. We're still quite distinctive in our own ways, you see. But women and children first, and I think that if we can get that out in public and make that more visible, and as Tavis says, more and more is not just black and brown faces on poverty, because it's been color-coded for a long time. See?
And the irony, I might add real quick, Stacey, the irony of all of this is, and obviously in a campaign for the White House, the issues change daily. Sometimes they change by the hour. But every one of us in this room and on YouTube right now knows that one of the great debates right now over the last few days has been whether or not there is, in fact, a war on women. And should Ann Romney have gone to work? And what does it mean that she didn't go to work? And how many nannies did she have? And what about the rest of women? I mean, so we're in this debate, at least a pseudo debate about women in our society with regard to their economic status, their economic condition, and their economic future. But we still haven't gotten, even in that debate, to the real issue. Nobody on the Democratic side, nobody on the Republican side has said that women and children must be first. That women and children, oftentimes the weak and the vulnerable, are falling faster into poverty than anybody else. So we get all these nonsensical, ridiculous, quite frankly, stuck on stupid debates about nothing. And that's what, in part, presidential campaigns are. It's about point scoring and trying to play to your base and the stuff that we all know make up presidential campaigns. But again, this is why you can't go through another process like this, where the facts are not placed on the table and people aren't forced to address what those facts really are. So whether you're Mr. Obama, Mr. Romney, or anybody else, what are we going to do about the fact, while we debate this other stuff, that women and children are catching the most hell? What are we going to do about the fact that Doc said a moment ago? I mean, that just every time I hear him say that, and we write about this in the book, but every time I hear that statement, that the younger you are in America, the more likely you are to be poor. That goes against the whole notion of the American dream. That goes against what every young person I'm looking at right now here at Google is all about. You want to make a difference. You want to make a contribution, but we're not naive here. You want your piece of the American dream. You want your chance at raising a family. You want your chance at home ownership. You want your chance, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But how do we arrive at this place of being a nation where, again, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be poor? Put another way, too many of our children are being forced to surrender their life's chances before they ever know their life's choices. And that ought to be unacceptable in this country.
Let's take some questions.
Thank you, Stacey. My name is Michael Peggs. I want to thank both of you for being here, and particularly Dr. West for my brother in the house known as Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
06,
We appreciate you.
Oh, don't start all that.
06. In the house. In the house.
Captains ain't going to have that today.
In the house.
Hold on.
Martin King, Du Bois, Duke Ellington. Jesse Owens. Adam Clayton, Paul Jr. Okay, I know you got a question.
I was traveling back from New York yesterday on the flight, rereading The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. I was reminded that education is really the paramount means for uplifting the people. And whether pragmatic and practical or classical and traditional, education really has to prepare you to make a living for yourself. And that was really his second theme in the book, the importance of earning a living. And I'm wondering if our current state of poverty is a result of our inability to make a living, somewhat implies an individual responsibility or something larger.
Yeah, it's a deep question. I appreciate the question. You know, the Greeks have a wonderful word called paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, which means deep education. Not the same thing as cheap schooling. Deep education. Learning how to die, criticizing yourself, wrestling with yourself, examining yourself, and then being a citizen, somebody who can actually be self-determining in that way. See, cheap education is just gaining a skill, becoming a consumer, and being a spectator. Not the same thing. It might even plug you into the job. Of course, so many jobs these days are low wage for the most part. But it's that deep education that sits at the center of a democracy. Now, cheap schooling might be tied to the market and so forth and so on. But there's got to be some balance between the market that is open enough for people to be able to allow their talents to flower and flourish, and then public space, common good. So it's not just about the private gain. It's something that holds us together, glue that holds us together. And deep education, public education at its best, historically has been that, but our priorities are warped. Here again, you know, and that's part of our challenge.
We could have a debate very quickly about which came first, the chicken or the egg, that which came first, education or poverty, because they're inextricably linked, the two, without having the debate about, you know, which one impacts which in which direction. What we saw on this tour, we spent a lot of time with children on this tour, and we saw children in your hometown of Detroit who come to school and they can't concentrate, and you know why. They haven't had anything to eat. Their living conditions are deplorable. We didn't just see this in Detroit. We saw this around the nation. But the link between education and poverty is well documented. Everybody agrees on the left and the right. Without access to a quality education, then you're much more likely to live a life of poverty. And so we take this issue without belaboring the point. We take this issue head on in the text. But again, something is wrong when kids, you know, we've been working with a program called Feeding America. And the numbers of children who go hungry in this country every day, the increasing rates of food insecurity, it's hard for a kid to go to school and concentrate and focus when there's so much lacking at home. Here again, women and children falling through the cracks. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So the fact that, you know, this room isn't overflowing out the building, to me, reflects the fact that the elite really don't prioritize poverty. And people in this room are obviously our colleagues and neighbors are, you know, part of the 1%. So how do you recommend that we, you know, even the most liberal of my colleagues and neighbors say, or extended social circles, they consider themselves liberal, but poverty, as you probably well know, it's not at the top of their list of concerns. You know, they're more concerned about internet privacy or, you know, climate change and plenty of other things. But poverty just isn't in their top 3, 5, 10. So what do you recommend we do to educate the people that we are in close contact with, who are the people who are in power in this country?
No, we're trying to see to it that within the next 2 to 4 or 5 months, many of your friends will not only be talking about it, but will have their conscience awakened. Because a lot of times it's a matter of exposure. A lot of times they tend to view what's going on in the corporate media, which tends to have a very truncated framework in regard to what's going on in the nation. Because they've got a bottom line too. So there hadn't been a lot of talk about poverty. I mean, a lot of people in America didn't know that there was such a thing as arbitrary police power in poor communities until Trayvon Martin came along. See what I mean? Oh my God, that's still going on in 2012? You don't say. But we all have our own bubbles. And people can't be in contact with everything at the same time. But when there's a major stress, the way Occupy stresses wealth inequality and corporate greed, people start talking, oh my God, that does make sense. That's true. Look at the stories. Newspapers start talking about it. And I think we haven't seen this in America really since John Edwards tried to pull it off, but then he had his problems, God bless him. But it goes back then to Martin King and Dorothy Day and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the others in the 60s, the Tom Haytons and others, who were trying to raise this issue. But now I think it's coming back. And so I think more of your friends, and again, not limited to liberals, but we're talking about centrists, conservatives, anybody who cares about other people's suffering. I don't think liberals have a monopoly on caring at all, even though, thank God, a number of them do. But I think there is going to be a real renaissance, and I hope I'm not naive about this. You don't think I'm naive?
Thank you.
I would never call you naive.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, never. Thank you for your question.
Hi, my name is Nava. Thank you both for being here. Dr. West, you referenced the prison system earlier in your conversation, and I'm just curious to find out your insights around the connection between poverty and prison, and if you think that a major overhaul of the prison industrial complex is necessary. If so, why?
Well, I appreciate the question. One, we make references to that magnificent text by our dear sister Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. And I was actually blessed to write forward to the paperback. It provides a full-fledged answer to your question. It has something to do with the war on drugs and why it is that the war on drugs is disproportionately targeting chocolate sides of town. 13% of young white brothers and sisters on vanilla side fly high in the friendly skies. 13% of black and brown fly high in the friendly skies. 62% of convictions, chocolate, black, brown, poor, you see. And so you go from 300,000 about 30 years ago to 2.4 million today. And again, not just a matter of priority, but socially neglected, economically abandoned, under intense police surveillance. That's black and brown poor people. But not even black and brown middle class people. Because we know, Jack and Jill, black brothers and sisters going to jail at the same level as Jamal and Letitia on the ground and poor, we have different kind of black leadership. And I love my Jack and Jill brothers, don't get me wrong. But it's the class question. How deep is your love for poor people, no matter what color? And think about it in America in terms of our priorities. I mean, we have come up with now these drones that could drop bombs on people all around the world. Zero in. Try to keep track of the terrorists. Sometimes you hit daughter and son. That's wrong. Wife, that's wrong. But you know how much goes into being able to generate that kind of unmanned aerial vehicle? And yet, when it comes to dealing with poverty or reforming the prison industrial complex, low priority, not on the radar screen. End up losing your democracy. You had the wrong things on the radar screen. That's part of our challenge.
If I can add to that right quick, I was thinking as Doc was talking again about how important context is to all of this. Again, the first chapter in this book, Stacy, lays out a portrait of poverty, how we arrived at this place. And in this moment, even when there's someone in the White House, and Doc and I are very clear in this book, we think that President Obama is far better than any alternative on the right on these issues. We're going to keep pushing him, but he's far better than any alternative that we see at the moment in the race. That's our own assessment. You may see that differently, but we lay that out in the book and say that unapologetically. Having said that, it's important to understand that whether we're talking about people we regard as our enemies, people who are pushing an agenda that's antithetical to the best interests of poor people, or we're talking about persons we regard as our friends, we have to remain vigilant, holding them accountable to the best interest of the least among us. Case in point, I was on Bill Maher, I guess Friday night on his real-time HBO show, and Bill and I had a conversation about this. So when you talk about the prison industrial complex that Nava asked about with Dr. West, the most damning thing that's happened to poor people since Ronald Reagan and that nonsensical so-called war on drugs, Reagan a Republican obviously, but the worst thing since then was a Democrat named Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton is my friend. I know he ain't going to be happy when he hears me say this. He's heard me say it before. The most racist law that Bill Clinton ever signed into law was the crime bill, where we made as a part of law the fact that you had to get caught with 100 times more powder cocaine. This is what Doc was suggesting. You got to get caught with 100 times more powder cocaine than crack cocaine to get the same sentence. 100 times more powder cocaine than crack to get the same sentence. We signed that into law during the Clinton administration. Negroes were celebrating Bill. We all love Bill Clinton. He come to our churches and sing, "We shall overcome," know all the verses, chorus, everything else. I've stood with Clinton many times, and when the Negro national anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," is sung, he knows all the verses. I know the first one. He knows all the verses to lift every voice and sing. So he's a friend of the black community, and I love him, and I'm not trying to demonize him and cast aspersion. I'm just saying that these politicians are not perfect. And even when they're our friends, we have to remain vigilant and vigilant about holding them accountable. So that was a horrible law that Bill Clinton signed. And so, you know, we've had to deal with that for all these years. So many of the consequences that Nava was asking about and Doc responded to had to do with this crime bill that we let Bill Clinton and Congress get away with signing during his term. That's on the prison industrial complex. Back to poverty. Women and children falling faster into poverty, I've said now for the 5th time, than any other group in our society. Why is that, Tavis? Well, that is the case in part because 15 years ago, Bill Clinton signed a so-called welfare reform bill. We refer to it as a welfare deform bill, but he signed the welfare reform bill. His intent was to move women from welfare to work. That's not exactly what's happened. And now, without going into all the particulars, you see the exact opposite. Where women don't have access to work and they don't have access to the welfare to give their children food to eat and medical care. They don't have access to that program anymore because we slashed the program so bad and changed the rules and regulations 15 years ago. Peter Edelman, the husband of Marian Wright Edelman, that Dr. West referenced earlier, has a wonderful book coming out a few weeks from now behind ours called So Rich, So Poor. Peter Edelman famously resigned his high position in the Clinton administration in protest over that law. Peter Edelman and myself and Dr. West and others were saying then, this is going to be bad for the country. Took us 15 years to finally get to a point now where the analysis and the data has been done. It didn't quite work out. The New York Times last Sunday before last, front page above the fold, major story, New York Times. 15 years later, look at the carnage that's been done as a result of that welfare bill. This was a guy who we liked. A guy who we supported and voted for and loved and held hands with and sang Kumbaya. And he did a lot of wonderful things, don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying, again, making the point, you got to stay vigilant, even when they're your friends, even when they are of your political persuasion, even when you are supporting them and giving them your money and giving them your vote and campaigning for them. You still got to stay on them because left to their own devices and the people around them, they won't measure up. And that's why in this era, poverty, again, is the issue of our time we have to address no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's running things on Capitol Hill. But I thought about that when you went into that dissertation because it's, you know, so much of this is about chickens coming home to roost years later, and that's why poverty's just run them up. But anyway, I digress.
So before we take this question from the audience, I want to go a little bit deeper on that because you bring up this concept, and this is what you're getting at, this fundamental fairness.
Yes.
So there's an inequity, and there needs to be a shift. And talk about what that shift means and who should be responsible for that shift. You talk about lobbying and organizations. Talk about what this fairness looks like. Is it motherhood and apple pie, or is it real?
I think it has to do with courage and taking a risk. We need more nonconformity in the culture because we live in a culture where everything is up for sale. Everybody's up for sale. Things like integrity and dignity and magnanimity ought to be beyond any kind of market price. But if the conformity is so powerful that people are just fearful of telling the truth and bearing witness because they're concerned about careers rather than their callings or their professions rather than their vocations, then you lose any source for the democratic awakening that needs to take place. Because again, this is a citizen's affair. And we speak as citizens. You know, we're citizens in democratic experiment. We're concerned about its imperial side. We're concerned about its racist, sexist, and classist side, and homophobic side, anti-Semitic side, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim side. But we know there's some good folk and some good things in the democratic experiment. That's what we stand for, you see. And there's always jazz and blues, which is always comforting. And Bruce Springsteen out there, you know, the white blues brother out there doing his magnificent thing with Wrecking Ball. But what we're saying is that if we don't give this a sense of urgency, then just like 1861, lose your democracy. Less folk came through. Just like 1930s, you can lose it. 1960s, you can lose it. Each time we were able to come through strongly. Can we come through this time? It's very, very much up to the younger generation. I'm old school. I'm old school. He's old school. You all, many of you new school. It's a beautiful thing to see the young. I'm not discriminating against the older brothers and sisters of all colors here, which is great. But it's going to be a younger generation affair. And that's when we say who they're going to lead it very much like the best of Occupy. I know he's got a question.
Last question.
All right, great. Well, thank you both for being here. My name is Daniel Lee Sanderson, and you both made a lot of keen, poignant points about poverty, particularly with respect to the new poverty and how that will or can threaten our democracy in the future. I guess what I'd like to hear a little bit more about is, are there particular aspects of our democracy that you feel are especially threatened? Is it the right to vote? Is it something like political stability? What are your thoughts on that?
You want to jump on that?
Well, I think it's all of the above. It's more of a smorgasbord for me.
It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
At the moment, since you raised it, the voting rights of people of color and poor people are particularly threatened. And I'm glad to see there is some conversation about this on radio and on television. Some persons have been out front on this, and we, of course, have been talking about it on our radio program, Smiley and West, as well. But that does concern me, particularly given that we're in an election year. The persons who are being targeted, the persons who are having to jump through all kinds of hoops, Republicans, and I'm not trying to cast aspersion, these are Republican-sponsored bills. Those are the facts across the country, where they're trying to deny and take away and make the hurdle so high for you to get into the booth just to cast your vote. There's a reason why these policies and programs and bills are becoming laws in certain states, impacting certain communities, and we all know what we're talking about here. So that's one aspect that does particularly concern me. We raise that issue in the text, but it is so fascinating. And again, we're out of time here, but there's so many issues that we raise in the book where you can just see how the body politic punishes, demonizes, criminalizes poor people, and it's again about highlighting those things, about being aggressive and pushing back on those things. But for me, I'll let Doc give his own answer. But for me, at the moment, of the list you just mentioned, the thing that I'm most concerned about, again, given where we are right now, is this attack on voting rights in the country. That is a particular aspect of democracy that poor people are being particularly punished by. That legislation is not just it's punitive and pejorative where poor people are concerned.
Yes, and I'm concerned about the moral and spiritual dimension of our democracy. You see, when citizens feel as if they're hopeless and helpless, impotent, that they don't make a difference, that the public interest is defined in such a way that nobody really cares about their suffering or their wounds and their bruises. That's the history of black folk for a long time, right? In the body politic, but civically dead, no real rights, anybody respect, right? That you say, well, how can a democracy survive when you have large numbers, and not just black folk now? We're talking about poor folk across the board. You see, they don't make a difference. Well, it reinforces narcissism, addiction, self-medication, escape, all of the various forms of mass culture, and all the little tricky techniques of trying to get people pacified because their pain is so overwhelming, and they figure they can do very little about it. Alcoholism, sex addiction, we go on and on and on. There's ways people have to deal with their wounds when people feel as if they can't really have an impact on their world. They can't lift their voices as it were. That's very dangerous. That's very, very dangerous. And I think part of the prophetic tradition that we try to enact in our own feeble way is to make a call for the kind of awakening and say, you do make a difference, and when you organize and mobilize, people can see you make a difference, and people care. Well-to-do people do care about working and poor people if they enact certain kinds of efforts to promote certain kinds of policies tied to public interest and so on. Right. So to give people a sense of, yes, we all in this thing together, and we either hang together or we hang separately.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Great way to end. We are all in this together. Thank you for
Thank you.
participating.
You were wonderful.
Joining us here at Google. participating and allowing our listeners on YouTube to get a little bit of a glimpse into the rich and the rest of us, and giving us all a call to action on what we can do as participants in this economy and caring about people. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderfully done.
Thank you.